Lucas Grant knew he was out of options when he shoved the battered brown box under his arm and jogged up the steps of the glossy high-rise, praying he wasn't making a mistake. "Please, just be the right floor," he muttered, his jeans still damp from the sudden downpour outside and his worn sneakers squeaking against the marble floor. He was 32, a single dad to his 5-year-old son, Jake, and barely holding it together. Delivering packages for a courier service during the day and bartending at night was the only way he could keep food on the table. Today, he'd picked up an extra shift, desperate for the overtime pay. Jake needed new shoes for school, and Lucas couldn't remember the last time he didn't feel like a failure. He found the door marked 23A, double-checked the address scribbled on the package, and knocked, hoping this would be quick. The door swung open almost immediately, and Lucas blinked in surprise. Standing there was a woman who looked like she belonged on the cover of a magazine. She was beautiful in a way that made it hard to breathe: long dark hair, warm brown eyes, and a fitted navy dress that hugged her figure perfectly. She looked expensive, out of place in this broken-down city. "Hi," she said, her voice friendly but cautious. Lucas cleared his throat. "Package delivery for Mr. Daniels," the woman frowned, glancing down at the label. "I think you have the wrong place. I'm Winona Dawson, no Daniels here," Lucas cursed under his breath. "Sorry, I must have mixed up the floors." He stopped, noticing Jake's drawing peeking out of his jacket pocket, a lopsided house with stick figures, family, home. He stuffed it back in, embarrassed, and tried to regroup. "I'm sorry for bothering you," but before he could turn away, Winona stepped forward. "Wait. It's pouring out there. Do you want to come inside for a second? Dry off." Lucas hesitated. This wasn't part of the job, but the thought of stepping back into the storm made him shiver. "Just a minute," he said. He stepped inside, careful not to track mud on her gleaming floors. The place was incredible floor-to-ceiling windows, sleek furniture, and a view of the city skyline that looked straight out of a dream. Winona disappeared into the kitchen and returned a moment later with a towel. "Here," she said, handing it to him. "You're soaked." "Thanks," Lucas said, rubbing his hair awkwardly. He felt out of place, like a stray dog someone let into a 5-star hotel. Winona smiled at him, her eyes crinkling just a little. "Rough day? You have no idea," he muttered, then caught himself. "Sorry. I didn't mean to dump that on you." "It's okay," she said, leaning against the counter. "I like honesty." There was something about her, something open and real under all that polished perfection. Lucas found himself wanting to tell her everything, about Jake, about the bills stacking up, about how he barely slept at night, terrified of losing everything. Instead, he said, "I should go, I've got more deliveries." Winona hesitated. "Wait, are you hungry?" Lucas blinked. "What?" "I was just about to order lunch, and I always order too much." She smiled again, a little shy this time. "Stay, eat." He should have said no. He should have walked out and never looked back, but something in her voice, something genuine, made it impossible. "Okay," he said, surprising himself. They sat at her kitchen island, eating takeout from a fancy Italian place Lucas had only seen on TV. He tried to be polite, but the food was incredible and he was starving. Winona watched him with an amused expression. "You have a good appetite." "Sorry," he said, wiping his mouth. "It's just, this is really good." She laughed, a soft sound that filled the room. "I'm glad." They talked about nothing and everything. Lucas told her about Jake, and she listened like she actually cared. She told him about growing up nearby, how she loved the city but hated how lonely it could be. Lucas didn't ask what she did for work. He figured someone living in a place like this had to be important. Eventually, he stood up, feeling guilty. "I should go." Winona stood too, a flicker of something crossing her face. "Disappointment. I'm glad you stopped by, Lucas." He smiled. It felt rare, smiling like that. "Me too." Outside the door, he leaned back against the wall for a second, heart pounding for reasons he didn't want to examine too closely. 2 days later, Lucas was back in the same building, this time on the correct floor. As he passed 23A, the door opened and Winona stepped out, nearly colliding with him. "Oh," she said, laughing. "Lucas," he grinned, unable to help it. "Hey." She looked amazing, wearing jeans and a white sweater that somehow made her even more beautiful. "Are you delivering again?" she asked. "Yeah, gotta keep the lights on," he joked. She hesitated, then said, "Listen, I'm going to a charity event tonight. It's boring, just a lot of suits and fake smiles. Would you maybe want to come as my plus one? Lucas stared at her, stunned. You want me to go to a fancy party with you, she laughed again. You'll be doing me a favor. Please, he should have said no. He didn't own a suit. He didn't belong in her world, but the way she looked at him, hopeful, almost nervous, made it impossible. All right, he said. But don't say I didn't warn you. That night was a whirlwind. Winona picked him up in a black town car, wearing a red dress that made his heart skip a beat. She handed him a perfectly tailored suit, still in the plastic. I guessed your size, she said, a little sheepish. Lucas stared at the expensive label. Winona, this must have cost, don't worry about it, she said, her eyes soft. It's a gift. At the gala, Lucas felt like a fish out of water. The room glittered with chandeliers and designer gowns. Waiters floated by with champagne. Everyone seemed to know Winona, and they treated her with a deference Lucas didn't understand. Who are you? He asked her in a low voice, half joking. She smiled mysteriously. Just a girl who likes Italian food. But later, he overheard someone whispering. That's Winona Dawson. CEO of Dawson Enterprises. She's worth billions. Lucas froze. He looked at Winona across the room, laughing, radiant, completely out of his league. He felt the truth slam into him like a freight train. He was just a struggling dad who couldn't even afford new sneakers for his kid. And she was a billionaire. He didn't belong in her world, he never would. And yet she was looking at him like he was the best thing in the room, like he was enough. Lucas didn't know what to do with that, but he knew one thing. The night wasn't over yet, and neither was this story. Lucas barely slept that night, tossing in the narrow bed he shared with Jake in their two-bedroom apartment. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Winona in that red dress, standing in a room full of polished smiles and expensive perfumes, looking at him like he mattered. He couldn't stop thinking about the way her hand had brushed his arm when she introduced him to people he'd never heard of, how she'd laughed at his awkward jokes as if they were the highlight of her evening. Reality hit hard the next morning. The suit hung like a ghost over the back of the kitchen chair, still carrying the faint scent of her perfume. Lucas shook his head and focused on packing Jake's lunch, forcing himself back into the life he knew. He had bills to pay, a kid to raise, no room for fairy tales. Jake shuffled into the kitchen, his little feet dragging against the cracked linoleum. "Daddy, why are you smiling?" Lucas hadn't realized he was. He tousled Jake's hair and handed him his lunchbox. "Just thinking about something funny, buddy." After dropping Jake off at school, Lucas headed for the courier depot, determined to lose himself in work. But the universe had other plans. His manager, a short-tempered man named Vic, cornered him before he could clock in. "You're late," Vic barked, waving a clipboard in Lucas's face. Again. Lucas checked his watch. 5 minutes. "Doesn't matter. You screw up one more time, you're out." Lucas swallowed the urge to argue. He couldn't afford to lose this job. Instead, he grabbed the stack of deliveries and hit the road, trying to focus on the addresses and not the memory of Winona's hand slipping into his at the gala. He was halfway through his route when his phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled over, heart lurching when he saw Winona's name flash on the screen. Hesitating only a second, he answered. "Hey," he said, trying to sound casual. "Hi," she said, her voice warm. "I was wondering if you were free tonight." Lucas's brain short-circuited. Tonight. "There's this thing at the museum, private showing. I'd love it if you came." He glanced at the pile of packages on the passenger seat. "I don't know if I'm your kind of crowd, Winona." "I'm not asking you to impress anyone," she said softly. "Just be yourself." He hesitated, torn. But Jake had a sleepover at a friend's house that night, and for once, he didn't have to scramble for a babysitter. "All right," he said before he could talk himself out of it. "Where should I meet you?" "I'll send a car," she said. That night, Lucas stood outside the museum, feeling wildly out of place in the same suit she'd given him. He almost turned around twice, but then a sleek black car pulled up, and Winona stepped out. She wore a silver gown that shimmered under the streetlights, her hair swept up in a way that showed the graceful line of her neck. Lucas forgot how to breathe for a moment. "You look incredible," he managed. Her smile lit up the night. "And you look very handsome." Inside, the museum was closed to the public, the usual crowds replaced by a handful of sharply dressed individuals murmuring over art pieces. Lucas didn't recognize a single painting, but Winona led him through the exhibits like she had all the time in the world, pointing out her favorites. At a sculpture of a mother cradling her child, she paused longer than usual. Lucas saw something shift in her expression, something vulnerable. "My mom used to bring me here when I was little," she said quietly. Before everything got complicated, Lucas didn't press. Instead, he said, "She must have been pretty amazing." Winona gave a small laugh, but it caught somewhere in her throat. She was. They moved on, but the air between them buzzed with something new, something deeper. Later, as they stood on the museum's terrace overlooking the city, Lucas leaned against the railing, feeling the weight of the night settle into his bones. "You ever think about running away?" he asked suddenly. Winona turned to him, her eyes searching. "All the time." He chuckled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Where would you go?" "Somewhere no one knows my name," she said. "Where I could just be a person, not a title." Lucas looked at her then, really looked at her. Not the billionaire, not the woman in the designer dress, just Winona. A woman who wanted the same things he did, a place to belong, someone to see her. "You could," he said. "You could do anything." Her hand brushed his, tentative, testing the waters. He didn't pull away. "You make it sound so easy," she whispered. "Maybe it could be," he said, his voice rough. They stood there, the city sprawling out beneath them, the night heavy with possibilities. When the car dropped him off at his apartment later, Lucas stayed outside for a long time, looking up at the stars. He didn't know what this was between them, but it scared him how much he wanted it. Inside, Jake's stuffed dinosaur had fallen off the couch. Lucas picked it up, setting it carefully by his son's pillow. He lay awake for hours, replaying Winona's laugh, the way her fingers had lingered against his, the sadness she tried to hide behind her brilliant smiles. He didn't belong in her world, he knew that. But for the first time in a long time, he wondered if maybe, just maybe, he didn't have to keep standing outside looking in. Maybe he could be part of it, if he was brave enough to try. Lucas arrived at the park just as the sun dipped low, casting a soft golden glow across the playground. Jake was already racing across the jungle gym, his laughter bright and unburdened. Lucas slumped onto a bench, grateful for the moment to catch his breath. He needed to think. Winona had sent him a message earlier through a mutual acquaintance she had met at the gala, an invitation to dinner, this time at her private rooftop terrace. Formal but personal. Lucas had hesitated before answering with a polite acceptance. He couldn't keep running from the gnawing feeling that she wasn't just being kind. She wanted him there, not for show. For her, he watched Jake swinging higher and higher and wondered if he was being selfish. What if he was dragging his son into something too complicated, a world too different? "Mr. Grant," Lucas turned at the unfamiliar voice. A tall man in a suit stood nearby, holding a large envelope. "Yeah," the man extended it without preamble. "Miss Dawson asked me to deliver this to you personally." Lucas took the envelope warily. Before he could ask anything else, the man nodded and walked away, disappearing into the crowd of parents and children. Lucas tore it open carefully. Inside was a handwritten note on thick cream paper. "Tonight isn't about business, it's just dinner. Bring Jake if you want. I'd love to meet him properly." Winona, he stared at the note, his chest tightening in a way he couldn't explain. He had expected her to keep Jake at a distance, the way most people did, the polite smile, the quick excuse to avoid the complication of a kid. But she hadn't. Later, after making sure Jake was fed and dressed neatly in his best jeans and button-up shirt, Lucas hailed a cab. He couldn't bring himself to let a town car pick them up again. It felt like cheating. The building's doorman greeted Lucas by name, handing him a visitor's badge without needing to be asked. That was new. He tucked it into his pocket and nudged Jake forward, the boy's small hand gripping his tightly. The elevator was silent except for Jake's wide-eyed amazement at the glass walls offering a dizzying view of the city. Lucas couldn't blame him. He felt like a tourist too. When the elevator doors opened, they stepped directly into a wonderland. The rooftop terrace was transformed into a dreamscape. Twinkling string lights crisscrossed above a long table set with simple, elegant dishes. There were planters overflowing with herbs and flowers, a small fountain trickling softly in the background. It was intimate, yet breathtaking. Winona stood by the table, wearing a simple sage blouse and dark jeans. her hair loose around her shoulders. Nothing about her screamed billionaire tonight. She looked like a woman waiting for something or someone she genuinely wanted to see. Jake tugged at Lucas's hand, whispering, "Is this a castle?" Winona laughed, the sound warm and inviting. She crouched down to Jake's level. "Not quite a castle, but it's pretty cool, right?" she said. Jake nodded solemnly. "Do you have a dragon?" "No dragon," she said, pretending to sigh. "But I have ice cream." Jake's face lit up, and Lucas felt something deep in his chest loosen. Dinner was relaxed, almost startlingly so. Winona had ordered from a local pizzeria, not some five-star restaurant. They ate slices of pepperoni pizza and shared stories about the most ridiculous things they had ever done. Jake chattered nonstop, completely at ease. Lucas listened more than he talked, memorizing the way Winona's eyes crinkled with genuine amusement when Jake described his kindergarten art projects, how she leaned forward when Lucas mentioned his dream to one day open his own auto repair shop. "You're good with your hands," she said, her voice thoughtful. "You could make that happen." Lucas snorted, not unkindly. "Takes more than wishful thinking, takes money, time." Winona's expression softened in a way that made his heart stumble. "You have something better, you have grit." "Most people don't." He didn't know how to answer that. No one had ever said something like that to him before. After dinner, Jake fell asleep curled up on one of the lounge chairs, a blanket tucked around him. Lucas watched him for a moment, then turned back to Winona, who was nursing a glass of wine and staring out over the skyline. "You really don't mind?" Lucas started, then trailed off. "That you brought him," she finished for him. "Not even a little." Lucas leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. "You're not like the people you're usually around, are you?" She smiled, but it was tinged with sadness. "They see the name, the company, the money. They don't see me." Lucas hesitated, then said, "I see you." It was the truth, simple and heavy. Winona set her glass down and turned fully toward him. "Then maybe you're the only one who really does." The space between them felt charged, a delicate balance tipping. Lucas could feel the pull, the gravity of her, but before he could say anything else, Jake stirred in his sleep, mumbling something incoherent. Lucas stood quickly, the moment breaking, and scooped his son into his arms. "I should get him home," he said, his voice rougher than he intended. Winona nodded, standing too. She walked them to the elevator, the warm night air brushing around them like a whisper. At the doors, Lucas hesitated. He didn't want to leave, not really. "Thank you," he said finally, "for tonight." "For everything." Winona reached out, brushing her fingers lightly against his forearm. "Lucas, you don't have to thank me, I want you here." He didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded, stepping into the elevator with Jake heavy against his chest. As the doors slid closed, he caught one last glimpse of her standing there, barefoot, the city lights haloing her in gold. Lucas knew he was already in deeper than he should be, and he was starting to realize he didn't want to find a way out. Lucas paced the length of his small living room, the threadbare carpet muffling his steps. Jake was at his friend's house again for a Saturday sleepover, giving Lucas a rare evening alone. He had been turning Winona's invitation over in his mind all day. A formal gala, Dawson Enterprises' annual fundraiser. High society, cameras, speeches. Everything he usually avoided like the plague. He stopped at the window, gazing out at the city's twinkling lights. Somewhere out there, Winona was getting ready, probably surrounded by assistants and stylists, yet she wanted him by her side. Not as a charity case, but as her guest. Lucas pulled out the invitation she had slipped into Jake's backpack, along with a handwritten note telling Jake he could come too if he wanted. He smiled faintly at the memory of Jake's excitement when he found it, asking if there would be cake. His phone buzzed on the table. A simple reminder from Winona's assistant about the car waiting downstairs. No pressure, no demands. He grabbed the suit she had given him, still perfectly pressed, and got dressed quickly. Before stepping out, he locked the door behind him, double-checking Jake's overnight bag was packed properly for tomorrow. The town car was waiting at the curb, the driver greeting him politely before pulling into traffic. Lucas stared out the window, nerves knotting in his stomach. He had faced down eviction notices, angry customers, and more double shifts than he could count. But nothing felt as terrifying as walking into her world tonight. When he arrived, the hotel hosting the gala loomed like a palace, all glittering chandeliers and red carpet. Lucas stepped out, ignoring the curious glances from the other guests. He adjusted his jacket and moved inside. The ballroom was breathtaking. Golden light spilled from massive crystal chandeliers. Tables draped in white linen were arranged around a glossy dance floor. A string quartet played near the stage, their music weaving through the air like silk. Lucas spotted Winona instantly. She wore a deep sapphire gown that skimmed the floor, her dark hair pinned up in an intricate twist. She wasn't surrounded by admirers or fenced off by security. She stood near the stage, scanning the crowd until her eyes found his. She smiled, the kind that made the whole room fade away. He crossed the floor to her, aware of the stairs but caring less with every step. "You made it," she said, her voice low enough that only he could hear. Lucas nodded, his throat tight. Wouldn't miss it. Her hand slipped into his, warm and sure, and together they stepped into the crowd. The evening blurred into a series of introductions and polite conversations. Winona never once treated him like he didn't belong. She introduced him simply as Lucas, her guest, letting others draw their own conclusions. Some looked curious, a few looked skeptical, but Lucas held his ground, buoyed by the steady pressure of her hand against his. Later, as the speeches ended and the music shifted to something slower, Winona tugged him toward the dance floor. "I can't dance," Lucas warned, half joking, half terrified. "You don't have to be perfect," she said. "Just hold on to me." He did. They moved together awkwardly at first, Lucas stiff and uncertain. But Winona laughed softly, guiding them until he found the rhythm. Her body fit against his like a missing piece he never knew he needed. "You're better at this than you think," she teased. "Only because you're carrying me," he muttered, but he found himself smiling anyway. As they swayed, Lucas noticed the way others watched them. Murmured comments passed between tables, curious glances sharpened into whispers. He stiffened, but Winona only pressed closer, her head resting against his shoulder. "Let them talk," she whispered. "It doesn't matter." Maybe it didn't. Not when she looked at him like this, like he was the only one in the room. After the dance, they stepped outside onto a private balcony. The city stretched out below, glittering and infinite. "I'm terrified," Lucas admitted, the words slipping out before he could stop them. "I don't belong here, Winona. I don't know how to be part of this world." She turned to face him fully, her gown whispering against the stones. "I don't want you to be part of this world," she said. "I want you to be part of my life." He blinked, struggling to process her words. "I grew up in meetings and mansions," she continued. "I know all about pretending, smiling when you don't mean it, saying the right things. But with you, there's no pretending. You're real, that's what I want." Lucas shook his head slowly. "I'm just a guy trying to keep the lights on. I don't have anything to offer you." "You have everything I need," she said fiercely. "You have heart, you have loyalty, you have Jake, you have love." The air cracked open between them, raw and electric. "I love you," she said, the words steady, unflinching. "I'm not asking you to change, I'm asking you to let me in." Lucas felt something inside him fracture, then heal all at once. He had spent so long being the one left behind, the one overlooked, that he didn't know how to trust someone choosing him. But Winona wasn't offering him a handout. She was offering him a home. He stepped forward, cupping her face in his hands. Her skin was soft, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "I love you too," he said, the truth ringing in every word. "God help me, I love you." He kissed her then, a fierce, desperate kiss that tasted of hope and fear and everything he had been too afraid to want. When they finally pulled apart, Winona was laughing through her tears. "Move in with me," she said breathlessly. "Bring Jake, we'll figure it out together." Lucas hesitated only a second before nodding. "Yeah, let's figure it out." 3 months later, Lucas stood in the same ballroom, but this time he wore a tuxedo that fit him perfectly. Jake was the ring bearer, grinning proudly as he carried a tiny velvet pillow down the aisle. Winona walked toward him in a gown of ivory lace, her smile brighter than the sun. As they exchanged vows beneath a canopy of white roses, Lucas realized something he never thought possible. He wasn't just surviving anymore, he was living, and he was home. Lucas adjusted the collar of his shirt, glancing at the mirror one last time. He still wasn't used to the sprawling penthouse where the windows stretched from floor to ceiling and the city buzzed below like a living thing. He caught sight of Jake in the reflection, bouncing excitedly on the leather couch, a bright blue backpack at his feet. "You ready, buddy?" Lucas asked, tightening the laces on Jake's sneakers. Jake grinned, missing a front tooth. "Ready?" Winona appeared in the doorway, her hair in a loose braid, wearing jeans and a white blouse. She looked effortlessly beautiful, but more importantly, she looked happy. Lucas's heart kicked at the sight of her, at the knowledge that this was his life now, not something borrowed or temporary. "Everything packed?" she asked Jake. "Yep." Jake slung the backpack over his shoulder. "Got Mr. Dino my games and my pajamas." Winona crouched down, checking the zipper. "Good, you're gonna have so much fun at Ethan's house." Lucas stood, brushing dust from his jeans. "Thanks again for arranging the car." "It's nothing," Winona said, rising to her full height. "I want Jake to feel special." Jake darted toward the front door, his excitement too big to contain. Lucas followed, meeting the driver, a kind, older man Winona trusted, and making sure Jake was safely settled. Only when the car pulled away did Lucas turn back toward Winona, feeling the quiet of the apartment wrap around them. She stepped closer, her fingers brushing his. "Alone at last," she said with a teasing glint. Lucas laughed under his breath. "Feels like the first time in months." "Because it is," she said, looping her arms around his neck. He pulled her close, the familiar scent of her shampoo grounding him. "What now?" "I have an idea," she said, her eyes sparkling with mischief. "Come with me." She led him upstairs to the rooftop garden, still lush with the herbs and flowers she loved. A table was set in the corner, 2 plates, 2 wine glasses, and a small vase of fresh daisies in the center. Lucas blinked, stunned. "You did all this?" "I figured we deserved a date night," she said, tugging him toward the table. "A real one." They sat down, the sky turning a deep violet overhead. Winona lifted the lid from a serving tray, revealing 2 perfectly grilled steaks, roasted vegetables, and buttery rolls. Lucas shook his head, smiling. "You cooked." "With help from the catering team," she admitted, laughing, "but I picked everything." As they ate, conversation flowed easily. She told him about a new art exhibit she wanted to visit, and he shared stories about the garage he was slowly building in the penthouse's extra space, a project she had encouraged wholeheartedly. "You know," Lucas said, sipping his wine, "6 months ago I was delivering packages and praying not to get evicted." Winona reached across the table, lacing her fingers through his. "And now you're building your dream." "Because of you," he said, his voice rough. "No," she corrected gently. "Because you never gave up." Lucas squeezed her hand, overwhelmed by the sheer rightness of it all. "Maybe, but I wouldn't have believed it was possible without you." She stood then, tugging him up with her. Without warning, she placed his hand on her waist and began to sway to music only she could hear. "No excuses this time," she said, grinning. He chuckled, following her lead. "You're relentless, you know that? Only about the important things," she said, resting her head against his chest. They danced under the stars, the world falling away until it was just the 2 of them, the steady beat of their hearts the only rhythm that mattered. After a long while, Winona pulled back slightly, her eyes serious. "I've been thinking," she said, "about us." "About Jake?" Lucas stilled, sensing the weight behind her words. "Yeah, I want to make it official, not just living together. I want us to be a family, legally." He stumbled over his words, caught off guard. "You mean adoption?" She nodded. "If you'll let me, I want to be there for him." "For you, forever." Emotion clogged his throat. He hadn't realized how deeply he needed to hear that until now. Lucas pulled her into a crushing hug, his voice rough against her hair. "Yes." "God, yes." When they finally pulled apart, Winona's cheeks were damp with happy tears, and Lucas wasn't far behind. They sat back down, leaning into each other as the city lights shimmered around them. They made plans, real plans. Jake's school projects, family vacations, lazy Sunday mornings filled with pancake batter and cartoons. Dreams stitched together not by wealth or obligation, but by love. Months later, in a small, sun-drenched courthouse, Lucas watched as Jake held Winona's hand tightly, grinning up at the judge. Winona wore a simple blue dress, her hair loose, and Lucas wore the same suit she had given him all those months ago, altered now to fit perfectly. The judge smiled warmly as he signed the final document. "Congratulations. You're officially a family," Jake whooped, throwing his arms around Winona's waist. Lucas wrapped them both in his arms, feeling the last pieces of his old life fall away. Outside the courthouse, Winona turned to Lucas, her hand slipping into his. "We did it," she said, her voice thick with emotion. He kissed her forehead, then her mouth, pouring every promise he had into that kiss. "We're just getting started," he whispered. They piled into the car, Jake chattering from the backseat about the ice cream celebration Winona had promised. Lucas caught her gaze in the rearview mirror, and she smiled a smile that spoke of 1,000 tomorrows. And for the first time in his life, Lucas knew he wasn't just lucky, he was home, forever.